Coming to paperback and e-readers, Esteem Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this all-new Esteem series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in digital format at Amazon.com, Google Play, Draft to Digital, and other digital booksellers, or pick up your paperback copy on May 24th. In a previous video, a viewer requested they wanted me to talk about the failed leadership of baby boomer men and later silent generation men. And that same viewer has requested a video where I talk about the failed teachings and relationships of later silent generation women and baby boomer women. Now, when many of the women who became a part of the baby boomer movement were born, they grew up in a world of privilege that was given to them primarily by their greatest generation parents and some of their silent generation parents. And because they didn't have to go through the struggles that their silent generation and greatest generation parents had to go through, they learned a lot of dysfunctional values from their parents, and those dysfunctional values basically led to the start of America going into a state of decline. However, that state of decline really started in the later part of the Industrial Revolution, and it started in the early part of the Industrial Revolution because America's men really didn't watch where their women were going as related to their moral position. And they couldn't really watch where their women were going as related to their moral position because due to the Industrial Revolution, many of the men left the agrarian farm economy that was really driving America's economy and trade to become a part of the industrial economy. And as they were looking to work at plants and factories and other types of jobs that took them away from the home, they couldn't take an active role in supervising their families, and this was left to a woman who really started to not learn her role as related to God's order and started to look to follow the order of corporate America that was emerging. Now, when it came to the family in the agrarian society, they followed God's order and knew their roles as men and women. The man knew that he was the head of the household, and this was established by God, and he got his instructions from Jesus and the Most High. And the woman knew her role as a helpmeet and looked to support the men. And because they got most of their money from the agrarian business that was run by the man, usually the woman looked to submit to the man's authority. However, as we entered an industrial age, many women started to see that they could go out and make money on their own, and we had movements like the suffragist movement telling women that they could go out here and do things for themselves. And as the suffragist movement went on, many women, while they did disregard it, and only a few of the poor women followed it, many women started to get their minds influenced by other forms of media that were emerging, such as the publishing industry, and later on in the 20th century, or the early 20th century, the radio and the other forms of media such as film. And as those women started to get influenced, we started to see the moral position of America's women slowly start to change. And as the late David Carroll said in his, oftentimes quoting this old African proverb, a race can rise no higher than the moral position of its women. And as the woman went, so went the race. And in the case of America, as the woman went, so went the direction of the country. And as many of these women started to get influenced by American media and concepts that came out of the Roaring 20s, we started to see women start to believe that they could adopt to more rebellious behaviors, such as that of the suffragist, who was the precursor to the feminist, and the other precursor to the feminist, also known as the flapper. Now, both of these women were known for their rebellious images, the suffragist for her rebellious set of social values, looking to go and try to stand against men, And the flapper was the foundation of the ideals of the sexually promiscuous woman, because this was a woman who wanted to not spend her time looking to spend her youth looking to get married, but looking to spend her youth living out her best days in places like bars before Prohibition, and going to those bars with her hair cut short and wearing short dresses and looking to participate in casual sex with men. And when Prohibition was established, believed that this would be socially acceptable behavior to get involved with guys at places like speakeasies, because the speakeasy was a place where they sold alcohol illegally, which really stimulated many of these women's emotions. And going to these places allowed them to get social currency because it could show how rebellious they are. And as we went from the 1930s into World War II, we started to see the moral position of America's women start to further get influenced by corporate America, because as America entered into World War II, this is where women stopped looking to serve their man and serve their husband in a lot of cases, because their man was serving in World War II, and as their husband was serving in World War II, America's women needed to go to work to help support the war. And as they helped support the war, what went on was a lot of the wealthy came in and looked to further influence the American woman, and looked to influence her to go from, as they worked in factories producing these weapons, to becoming consumers who would go out here and look to spend their money in those homes. And as they gained influence over America's women, because there was no man there to give her any sort of guidance or give her any sort of leadership, what happened was a lot of those women started to get influenced by corporate America. And as they started getting influenced, they started to believe that they did not nearly need the support of a man because they had their own money. And others looked to believe that they could go out here and be able to have, since they had their own money, they could buy whatever they wanted. And while this was a mindset that was of a small group of women at the time, it did have an impact on women who really started to stand up for themselves as related to the women's rights movement. Now, the women's rights movement was a movement that came out of those factories in World War II, because women basically felt that they were being oppressed, and they were being oppressed in those factories where they had no protections against sexual harassment and sex crimes that took place in the workplace, and being denied positions even though they were qualified for those positions at many corporate jobs. And the women's rights movement was all about women getting the rights under the law as related to tangible federal laws to protect themselves. And that was done, again, to protect women who came into the workplace because of World War II. But as those women came out of World War II and they got involved with their husbands, that's when we started to see how the failed teachings of the previous generations, such as the suffragist movement and the consumerist mindset that was established by corporate America, and the rebellion that was promoted by Hollywood as related to the image of the flapper and other types of women, started to have an influence on most women who became a part of the baby boomer generation. Now, this baby boomer generation and later silent generation of women, as their mothers came back to the home, they wound up in what they called a malaise, as their husbands started to return to work to start building their families. Now, these women basically had far more than the women of the previous generations, such as the lost generation, the greatest generation, and the earlier parts of the silent generation. Those women had far more. Unfortunately, many of those women basically started to become what they called a malaise, because they couldn't have the power that they had during World War II when they were working in the factories. No, because they had to go back to the home what they did was some of them started to go into this malaise where they looked to just give their children stuff instead of looking to raise them with values. And because they gave them stuff instead of raising them with values, what they did was basically spoil a lot of those kids. And as those children got spoiled and given everything, they didn't appreciate anything because they were not given any sort of values as related to moral position. And because they weren't given any sort of values as related to moral position, all they saw was just how to get ahead, and all they were thinking about was getting ahead. And they weren't thinking not just about getting ahead as related to marriage. No, what they were thinking about was getting ahead as related to taking power, as related to the relationship, because they were learning to be these consumers. And as consumers, they wanted to cut out the middleman, which was the husband who had control over the finances. And they wanted to get control over the finances because they wanted to be able to impulsively spend their money on consumer products. That's how we went from women wanting to look for a husband to look for a job, because they wanted to be able to get control over the economy. And corporate America wanted those women to get control over the economy, because if they got control over the woman and they got control over her money, they could get a consumer, they could get to spend lots of money with them. And sadly, what this did was teach women not to value morals or ethics or teach their children. No, what she was looking to do was focus on her career and get more money, leaving her children to be taught by television and radio and advertising of Madison Avenue in Hollywood. And this is what led to the baby boomer woman really becoming an ineffective mother, because her main focus was on making money as a young woman, and she wanted to continue focusing on making money because it was the only thing that she considered to be a priority. And she also considered trying to elevate her social status by looking to be this woman who would have all this success. All of this was taught to the baby boomer woman, and as the baby boomer woman went on without ever getting any sort of guidance from her mother or nurturing from her father, what happened to these baby boomer women is, as they were given things, they became extremely selfish and extremely greedy. And as they became selfish and greedy, it became all about them being the ones who got everything. And it was all about them having the power to maintain, continuing to get resources. That's what basically led to many of these women of the baby boomer generation really not thinking about looking to care for a family, but looking to have a career. They really looked to do this, and they looked to get this power that was given to them by corporate America and the government. So what they wanted to do was continue getting this power. And again, these were the failed teachings that laid the foundation for feminism in the 1960s that the baby boomer generation of women learned. And as they learned this whole concept of feminism, which was wrapped around consumerism, it was all about them having these jobs and money to have power, and them getting this de facto head of household position given to them by America's wealthiest men, because America's wealthiest men and corporate America, Hollywood and big business, wanted to be able to gain profits from this consumer, and they wanted to continue maintaining those profits from this group of baby boomer women. And this group of baby boomer women, again, who were indoctrinated into feminism, they wanted to go and have this power because they were indoctrinated to believe they could not trust a man. But the great irony was they were being misled by a group of wealthy men who were controlling corporate America, Hollywood, and Madison Avenue, and controlling them and leading them to walk away from their men. And that started the further decline of America, because once we compromised the moral position of America's women with feminism, which started out as the seeds of the suffragists and the flappers and other rebellious women, This started a complete revolution with women as related to not only feminism but the sexual revolution. And these teachings basically took America off its moral position, and it started the direction of the entire country going into decline, because the failed teachings of the baby boomer generation woman that she learned from her mother and grandmother, the suffragist and the flapper, started to teach dysfunctional values, and those dysfunctional values that came out of the sexual revolution that the feminist was a part of started to teach values that were really detrimental to children, like teaching children that they didn't need a father in their life, teaching women that and boys and girls that girls did not need a man, and teaching children that they did not need to be raised and supervised by a mother. Now, these are the kinds of values that a lot of kids wound up learning, that really started a lot of kids on the road to becoming men and women in crisis, because as they learned these dysfunctional values, such as learning that women did not need a man to provide for them, because men don't just provide economically, men provide leadership and guidance to women, and they supervise women to keep them from embarrassing themselves by participating in behaviors like sexual promiscuity. And when it comes to men, men provide emotional support and spiritual support and allow a woman to be a part of God's order. These are the things that women wound up missing out on because they were taught bad values. And as they were taught these bad values, what they were taught was that all they needed was a job in order to live in this world. However, a woman needs more than a job, because the Most High made women for men, and he made women to serve men. Unfortunately, due to the dysfunctional values that Western women who were a part of the baby boomer generation learned, they learned that they did not need men, that they could, if they had a job, they would be fine. If they had money that they were making, it was all about making more money. Unfortunately, many of those women wound up raising children who were not emotionally satisfied or spiritually satisfied. And what this did was go out here and raise children who wound up on the road to becoming men and women in crisis, because when these women raising their children without fathers in homes with no fault, divorce in some cases, they raised boys who grew up to become these beta males and socially engineered their boys to become beta males, because they learned ideas like they didn't need to be a father in the home to teach that boy how to be a man. Moreover, they learned that a woman could raise a boy to become a man without a father, and that doesn't really raise a boy to become a man. No, that raises a boy to become a man in crisis, because he doesn't have any of the life skills or survival skills only a father can teach. And when it came to the daughter, she basically learned dysfunctional ideas, and these dysfunctional ideas are ones that teach her that she can go out here and live without a man. Unfortunately, what happens to that daughter is, because she doesn't have a father to nurture her and provide her with love, what happens to that girl is she winds up looking for love from men who are dysfunctional, or males who are dysfunctional. And because she doesn't know how to find love, because she never had been given love by her father, what happens is that girl winds up on this quest looking for love, but never finding it, because she never had it modeled for her. And that's the kind of values that were passed on by these feminist indoctrinated baby boomer women, who thought that by getting these college degrees they could go out here and be the equivalent of a man and had a job like a man. But they didn't understand that that was only external traits of men, but there are other traits of men that no, only God gives a man, and those traits are not ones that can be replicated by any sort of academic institution, because these values are intrinsic to what the Most High teaches, because he is, as part of his order, he has a direct connection to a man, and he gives guidance to men in order to supervise the household and run the household and work with a woman But many of those women didn't get this, and because they didn't get these kinds of values, this is what's led to the complete breakdown of the American family, because God originally meant for men and women to work together, and he meant for men and women to work together because he has work that he wants done on earth, one which being he wants the gospel to continue to be preached and let people know about Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, and he wants people to know that he loves them and wants them to receive Jesus' gift of salvation. This is something that isn't being taught to children of later generations because the family has just been taken off the tracks due to the failed teachings of previous generations. And this baby boomer and later silent generation, they really didn't get good values. Yes, they got lots of stuff and lots of material things, but they didn't get the values that allowed them to have a moral position to set a strong course for the country. Because in order for a nation to grow, it has to have a strong moral position, but the nation these days, due to the previous generation of suffragists and the generation of these flappers, rebellious women, these women basically created the seeds for the whole thing as related to many of these women having dysfunctional ideas. I mean, this was a fringe group of women, and again, a very small fringe, but as that fringe started to get their message amplified by Madison Avenue in Hollywood during World War II, and we started to see more narratives that were presented towards so-called empowering women that were actually meant to make them consumers, we started to see these women starting to think that, oh, I can get more money. And again, this triggered their natural hypergamy. And instead of them looking to focus on the family, it became all about making money. And as it became about making money, sadly, the children that they had with the men in their lives wound up losing everything because the men, as the feminist movement started to rise, started to look to concede to give women more because the companies wanted to make more money, and many of the males wanted to gain more sexual access to these women. And because they wanted to gain sexual access to these women, these men started to change the entire social marketplace, where the cads, womanizers, and whoremongers took to the high levels of society, and the men who were good providers, leaders, and authority figures, they were pushed down to a lower level in society. And this led to a lot of young boys who were beta males learning dysfunctional values about men, learning to commodify relationships and only see having money as a reason for having a relationship with a woman, and believing that having casual sex with a woman defined him as a man. These were the failed teachings and relationships of the baby boomer generation that they passed on to Generation X and onward, that led to a lot of things coming up that came out of the baby boomer generation, in addition to the feminist movement, which was single motherhood and men basically turning into these pookies, which were basically coming out of the whole traits of men being these bums, which again, back in the day, those men were considered to be bums, but as the boomer generation went on, they were called beatniks, but the beatnik basically was a lazy guy who really didn't want to do anything and live off women. Same thing for the stoner and other men. These men were not, in many other generations, would not even survive. But over time, as we've had this moral position of America change, these males basically wound up becoming the norm because they were romanticized by Madison Avenue in Hollywood. And this was what really took us from one generation of betas to a new generation of socially engineered betas. But these men wouldn't survive in other eras because in those eras, a man had to work in order to eat. But these men, they are taught that they just didn't need to do this because their mothers spoiled them. And as their mothers spoiled them, they went on to live with women who further spoiled them. And again, these are the teachings and values that these men learned because America's moral position was put in a state of decline. And as it was put in this whole state of decline, it's been put in that state of decline because America's women were not supervised during the Industrial Revolution. And as a result, we have an America that's in decline, filled with not men and women who are productive, but men and women who are in crisis. Now, this was a video that a viewer requested as related to my two books, The Man Crisis and The Woman Crisis, and you can find both of those books in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com, and you can find those books at other online booksellers in digital formats such as Drafted Digital and Google Play and the iBookstore and Barnes & Noble. And you can find those books in paperback at other online retailers like Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and Target. And if you want to request your own video in the Man Crisis or Woman Crisis series, you can send a donation of a minimum of $15 to the Cash App or the PayPal by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Man Crisis, comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today. Coming to paperback and e-readers, Isis Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Isis Dark Incubus at Amazon.com and other online booksellers everywhere. Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes' Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes' Illuminati on Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.